As always, we begin, Benum Christ in it. I greet Christ in you and welcome you to this first session in October of 2021. I open and close with the prayer attributed to St. Patrick, though not really by him, but one would think in the spirit of his ministry. I read one critique of this, that there's too much me and I in it for Patrick to have written it, which is an interesting. But regardless, it is a much beloved prayer and one that I think speaks to the way in which we might confront our own demons. So let us pray. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is offense, let me bring pardon. Where there is discord, let me bring union. Where there is error, let me bring truth. Where there is doubt, let me bring faith. Where there is despair, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, let me bring your light. Where there is sadness, let me bring joy. Amen. So our first reading today is taken from page 101, if you prefer to follow along in the book. And we are exploring this question of spiritual parasites. Spiritual parasites are the most difficult to recognize because they are so adept at discretion. These demons do not emerge from places of brokenness and trauma, quite the opposite. They rise up from our experience of comfort and the desire to maintain it. They walk with ease throughout the sprawling suburbs of our interior life, where comfort and convenience are readily at hand. They are like perfect tenants who pay their rent on time, thrive in a swept and tidy house, and always manage to maintain a low profile. They are quiet and unassuming, lest they draw our attention to their shrewd handiwork. They befriend us just enough that we feel no compulsion to call their presence into question, much less evict them from our lives. In fact, if we're honest, we might secretly admit to enjoying their company. They are helpful, flattering, willing to go the extra mile to please us, and display a near perfect etiquette, having mastered the language of spiritual decorum and social civility. Our second reading this morning can be found on page 101 as well. Speaking of the parasitic demons, their symbiotic appeal is a simple but time-honored strategy that has worked since the dawn of humanity. Like the serpent of Eden, they know how to present the perfect blend of truth and lies. They know how to put our consciences at ease with token actions that never really transform society, but nevertheless exonerate us from feeling the need to try. They whisper, "Give this homeless person $1, or better, buy her a meal so she cannot use the money for drugs." Any impulse to reach across economic boundaries, to befriend her, to forge a relationship is thwarted before we can form it into a fully articulate idea. Thus, what I have really done is purchased a ticket to a freer conscience. I feel much better about myself as I pass her every day on the same street corner. I've done my part. In the end, she remains homeless, and I sleep soundly at night. Perfect. Let us pray. O Divine Master, let me not seek as much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in self-forgetting that we find, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are raised to eternal life. Amen. So good morning once again. I know these readings are a bit harsh. I hope we can have an honest conversation about maybe ways in which these types of things play into our own life. Full disclosure, I'm speaking here in these texts autobiographically. I don't stand above these struggles myself, and I wrote it precisely to be authentic about how those things play out in me. So I certainly don't stand here on any kind of high horse in judgment of anyone, but more as a confession of how I struggle or fail to struggle rightly with these types of dynamics in my own life. So the best way to begin, I think, to overcome or to address the way these parasites function and unfold themselves within our own lives is to begin to address them with that light of truth. And even if that really just expresses our struggle as a first step. So with that in mind, as always, you have the floor. I welcome your comments, critiques, questions, and thank you for being here. Hi there, Lucy. Lucy, you'll want to go ahead and unmute.
Sorry.
Pesky mute button. There you go.
Yes. I like the word parasites better than demons, because if you talk about demons for this type of thought, oh my God, it's like then we're obsessed by demons all day long. Well, no, okay, I'm exaggerating, but every thought that is warped would be like a demon. So I like the word parasite as something being coming from the human nature of the vulnerability of human nature. Is sometimes some events happen, like it can be a relationship, a broken relationship. It could be family violence. It could be a lot of things that will not belittle the mind, but shrink the spirit or make it not as beautiful as it was, or as pure as the person was as a child or an adolescent, or even at 20. Things happen in life, and the idealism starts to kind of become more realistic. And with that comes a sort of a more human, earthly brain that generates those types of thoughts. So I mean, it's really hard to get rid of them, but it gives me hope that you say that if we examine them in the light of the Spirit individually, that's interesting. That gives me hope. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. I do think that part of what comes later in life is the temptation to compromise because we become, say, jaded or calloused, as the case may be. And our idealism kind of diminishes. So why bother? Why try? It's naive to think I'll really make a difference, and so forth. And I do think that there is some correlation between the disappointments in life, even the injuries in life, and then how we begin to more readily compromise the idealism that would indeed make a change and so forth. It's that hardening of the heart, as it were. But yes, I do think there's hope. And I do think by just beginning to gently pull back at some of the coverings that we put over that is a start. So thank you for your comments. And good morning, Dave. Good to see you. Dave, I'll just go ahead and ask you to unmute as well.
Good morning, Father, and everyone. Father, you summarized the entire focus of my 30 minutes of reflection in one word. And it echoed throughout everything I said, and it was authentic. As I was going through, all of those places in my life that need work, it just summarized for me the extent to which I put out energy to look good. And there was a point in my meditation where I made a decision to type up a little sheet of paper that either said authentic or unauthentic and put it up on my wall.
That's exactly it, Dave. I mean, and it sounds almost silly, those little reminders, but it's about creating a manageable way to create that conscious filter. Oh, this is authentic, this is inauthentic, this is genuine, this isn't. And how that can just begin to not allow the interior conversation not to happen. And I think that's what's so important. It's when we stop that interior noticing or dialogue or response to that inauthenticity, that it just begins to slip and gets easier and easier, right? So thank you, Dave. That's a great filter. I think you'll, to some degree, then resonate with the real simplicity of my request for a practice that we'll be talking about at the end today. So thank you.
Thank you.
And hi there, David.
Good morning. I've been pondering about where the parasites live. I don't think it's in our hearts. I think because of baptism and because our hearts belong to God, that's not the place of residence, but I wonder if where they reside most of all in insidious ways is in our wounds. And sometimes a wound that you thought had been dealt with a long time ago gets opened again. And so I wonder if just fantasizing if a place where they reside is not our hearts, but in our wounds. And I just leave that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. First of all, I think there's more ways than one to skin a cat. So I'll clarify something that at least I talk about in the book, but I don't necessarily mean that it to contradict what you're offering here. One of the ways that I've thought through these various distinctions is that the sort of previous category, if you want to say, or species of demons that I tried to dissect is the ones I called the renegades. And those are the ones I identify with woundedness, because they tend to be arising up out of places that are unhealed and to which we try to distract or medicate in some way. So I think, to use the proverbial, addictive type behavior of any kind is really a habitual pattern of behavior, an addictive pattern that is covering up a deeper ability to address a deep wound or hurt. I think by contrast, what I'm talking about here, at least as I'm sort of conceiving it, is that the parasites, as I'm calling them, and that's my word, so it's arbitrary, but I'm trying to convey an image, is not the type of demons that reside in woundedness, but in complacency, in comfort, in the things that where we don't want life to change because it would be inconvenient or would call my privilege or my comfort or my status into question. Now, we could probably find multiple ways of talking about where our demons reside and which type. So again, I don't mean that contradictory, but that's the way I've tried to frame it. And if you find that helpful, it might be something to look back on. I know I've actually talked about that in just the last paragraph. So what might it mean to look at the types of behaviors that indeed grow out of unaddressed wounds? And what types of behaviors grow out of my desire to maintain a status quo because it serves me in whatever capacity, or just because I don't want to really have to give up the comforts, conveniences, and cushiness of my own life to be on the front lines fighting for some issue, be whatever that is. So I just wonder if that, might sink in and settle differently, but I offer you that as a consideration.
Thank you.
To that end, I do think you're right, though. The demons, at least that I refer to as the renegades, I think absolutely come out of woundedness for sure. That's the place to look for them, like little infections.
Thank you.
Let's see. You're welcome, David. Robert, please.
The word demon I find to be quite helpful because what it signals to me is that a demon is definitely not from God. God is love, and a demon is not someone who practices love. Here in the UK, October is Black History Month, and Nikki Gumbel, who some of us know, runs the Alpha program, which is now global, posted something from Martin Luther King that I think speaks to what you've been saying here, Father Vincent. And Martin Luther King writes, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it."
Right.
And I think that it resonates with what I hear you say. So I offer that.
Thank you, Robert. And let me just, in light of that, just let me go back and read a couple of lines that immediately precede the two paragraphs that I just read, meaning the last time we were together. And I write this, and I think I wished I had heard of King's citation before when I was writing the book, because it would have summarized perfectly. But I write this, and this is, again, immediately before the two paragraphs we looked at today. "While most of us will never be counted among the infamous tyrants or conspicuous villains of history, the only moral climate these demons need to flourish is one that renders us extraordinarily mediocre." And I think that essentially is what King is saying there. We just kind of stay the status quo because we don't want a disrupted life. And in the meantime, all manner, the book that was written on the the Nazi camps, like Auschwitz, the banality of evil just really spells this out in the most egregious sense. People say, well, how could people have done these horrific things? Well, it's because everybody's just a cog in the system. I'm not murdering people. I'm just checking boxes on this page. I'm just checking people's names as they come in the door. I'm not responsible. I'm not actually pushing the button in the gas chamber. I'm just part of a big system where I can kind of close off what I know is the end result. And I'm just doing what I'm told right here in my day-to-day work. And in that complacency, 11 million people were wiped out. So there's something to be said for this. Isn't just, a quaint little spiritual awareness. This is like how evil happens in the world. And there is the constant challenge for each of us to find within the context in which I live a real and authentic response to what King is challenging us there, not to simply remain complacent. And again, I always want to warn that the overwhelming, amount of evil we're constantly confronting in all forms could make it feel debilitating as to where we begin. So again, I always want to caution, you can't do everything. But then on the other end of that, you can't do nothing. So the question is, what is the something that I can do, and do it? That's that middle ground, I think, is so important for us to keep in mind, and to realize that those of us who are awakening in conscience to response of various forms of evil are then doing the part we can within our own context. And that's certainly a very important first step. I mean, even King realized that his initial struggle for the African American community grew. I mean, by the time you get to his "I Have a Dream" speech, if you just go back and look at how broad sweeping that is, nobody's free till we're all free. So his own plight became an entry point for a realization on what oppression means writ large, and how all of us are tied up in the common struggle toward freedom, justice, liberation, and so on. So thank you, Robert, for that. And happy Black History Month for those of you in England. All right. I believe, Christine, your hand was next. If it's, yes, please.
Yes, thank you. I think of these parasites as jailers, actually jailers that keep me trapped in the prison of my false self. And so I implore them to let me feel this compunction a little bit longer, just a little bit longer, because yeah, I can write a check to these different services that help fight against the injustice in our world and help protect the planet. But I want to feel the compunction long enough to do some action to make a difference, so I can feel tangibly that I have done some action, not just placated my sense of discomfort.
Yeah, Christine, thanks. You remind me of Augustine. Oh Lord, give me chastity, but not today. It's, it's that whole thing, right? So I mean, there's this sense of what I'll move into with the kind of slacktivism of I push a button and I've sent something to some senator whose name I barely know and so on, right? Which is that complacency. But then there really is that invitation. And I think that the one way of measuring the difference between just the small action of that's really helping no one in the end, but making me feel better, that I try to address, is relationship. That, Christ really calls us to relationship across whatever social divides we establish. Economic, in this case, say the person on the street corner. Obviously, we're struggling with relationships among different ethnic groups and so on. But there's all manner of ways in which our society establishes kind of pockets of people who tend to have similar homogenous qualities, whether that's, economic or ethnic and the whole religious. And what Christ seems to constantly be doing in the gospel is crossing the boundaries, be they social or religious, and saying, anybody who is made to feel on the outside is the object of my attention. That's the person I want to bring in. So I can't, we can't be naive. There so much of homelessness in this part of the world, and I think in most of our country here, is not necessarily driven by poverty. It's driven by mental illness. And because of laws that were passed in the 80s to sort of ameliorate the abuse of the mentally ill for many centuries prior, one of the unintended consequences is we could no longer require severely mentally ill people to stay on their medication. Okay, so with that medication, many of these folks could be living a somewhat integrated life, right? An active life of real social integration. Without it, they can't. And because they're not required, they delude themselves into thinking that they don't need it, and then end up turning to alcohol and drugs and heroin and all these things to address the struggle. And it's a very difficult problem for us to deal with, because we do need to respect the rights of all people, but yet we're having this proliferation of homelessness, by and large rooted in mental illness, more so than, say, poverty. So how do you address that? And what does it really mean then to not be naive about establishing real relationships with somebody who is schizophrenic or psychotic or delusional and so forth? I don't mean to placate it in an overly simplified way, but somehow I do think that the category of relationship, how do I establish contexts in which the relationships or the division of relationships that remain neatly pocketed or pigeonholed can be boundaried, can be crossed, can become more porous, be that with the economic disparities or ethnic or religious or whatever that may be. How do we begin to reach across those boundaries? Conservative and liberal, or Republican and Democrat, we're creating more and more pockets. How do we reach across and humanize one another? So as we think through the compunction you're talking about, Christine, I just wonder if a question of what could I do to at least move towards something of a more sustained relationship than something transactional as a way forward? And I get that that's complicated and layered. Jennifer, please. Speaking of complicated and layered,
I was
Jennifer.
gonna say. I'm so glad you brought all that up. I was just gonna, I mean, I'm still forming my thoughts, but I actually used to work at a homeless day shelter years ago. And one of the goals was just to be in relationship with people that are struggling with various things, primarily homelessness, but other related issues. And I found it really rewarding in some ways, but also it was really tough. And it just helped me see how sort of messy and complicated, humans are, even though there's so much light and beauty as well. And to try to hold all that could be, I think, it helped me grow some spiritually, but it was sometimes easy to fall into despair because some people don't want to be in relationship, or they're not at a point where they're, able to sort of take those steps, and you can't force people to do it either, as you talked about. And so I guess what I was wondering about is there's so much brokenness in the world, and maybe you've already addressed some of this, but we can't solve all the problems. So how do we listen to God and figure out what is our part? And sometimes I feel like my part is to give money, and I don't go to bed that night thinking that I'm a good person or that I did my part. I sometimes go to bed thinking, what else could I do? I prayed for the person, I gave them money, and yet it's such a big problem. And right now in my life, I'm not feeling called to sort of be, actively participating in some of these ministries. So I just wanted to, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think sometimes it's just so overwhelming. And so how do we help people sort of discern what they're called to do without making them think they're supposed to be doing everything? And how do you advise people around all that, Father Vincent?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do think, we begin with the acknowledgement of the idea that we are all members of Christ's body, and that self-discovery, that is to say, awareness of who I am is necessarily moving in the same direction of my deepening awareness of who I am as a member of the body of Christ, right? And that means that real vocation, and I do talk about this later in the book, that real vocation isn't something I do. It's something that arises out of how I present in the world. It's who I am and how that flows. And I remember when I was as an undergraduate in college, I was part of a semi-secretive group who would meet weekly, a bunch of guys who would discerning priesthood. It was in a Catholic context of the Franciscan order. And it was only secret because some kids didn't want their peers to know that they were thinking this through. So we kind of had a very mild sort of, it was kind of mildly secretive. But in any case, it was a very intimate group, and we shared every week on this question of vocation. And one of the students there was saying, I just feel this is such a struggle and I'm going to be giving up so much. And essentially the response was, if it's that going against your grain, then it's not what you're called to. In other words, you're going to know what you're calling because you feel a passion for it. And that's across the board. And so, you're right, Jennifer, as we said, there is so much going on, and we are aware of so many things. And we're even being called to support initiatives that are happening in parts of the world we may never even step foot on, continents we'll never visit and so forth. And all of that is good. And those resources do good because they support organizations and individuals who are doing work in countries where, I can't physically save an elephant from Marin County, California, but I can support organizations that are doing that work. And that is important work. So the question really becomes, who am I? What member am I? And what does those gifts make me as a member of Christ's body? And do I see, do I speak, do I listen, do I teach, do I use my hands? What is that? And do that thing for God, do that thing for the community. And that's what you're doing. That's your mainstay, if you will. My concern is doing nothing but placating my consciousness because I don't want to give of myself in any particular way. So I just kind of do these little slacktivism actions that really just make me feel like I can get on with my day and live with myself. You can't, again, you can't do it all, but you can't do nothing. So what is the thing? And that thing, I think, really grows out of your vocation, about where you are called. In your case, I could understand being a mother and trying to introduce, responsible, mature, thoughtful human beings into the world is a pretty demanding job, for example, and a noble one. So there you have part of who you are and your vocation as mother. And so we have to then ask ourselves, even at different stages in life, where I'm able to give of myself in different times and energies, and where that summon is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
What I really want to encourage is that we listen to that, because all of us have a contribution to make. And that the real question is, if it's something you're really struggling with and don't feel called to, then find the passion. That's what I think we're being called to. It's the thing that brings us to life. And that's going to be different for all of us, which we have to then acknowledge is what it means to be members of the same body, but different members.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And one other little thing, would you say that the sort of how you characterize the parasitic demons is wanting to preserve the status quo, or preserve your comfort and security and status, is very much sort of a false self thing, kind of like Christine was saying, and it really comes from that sort of perceived alienation from the divine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I think most of our striving for status, there is a degree to which we all feel at ease with a degree of financial comfort, or, a nest egg, or, a retirement plan, or however we want to talk about that in our society. And there's nothing wrong with that. If my life is chaotic and I become unable to sustain myself, I become a drain on the system rather than a responsible member, and, so forth and so on. So I'm not saying to throw caution to the wind. And, but again, it's all about that balance. So, maybe to just use perhaps an overused example now, it's one thing to invest, in a 401k, which, for example, USF does for me. And then it's another thing for me to elect that my portfolio would not include certain corporations that I have ethical issues with. And I have that option, right, to do that. But that's also going to mean less yield, in fact. Right. So can I look to making those types of decisions in a way that I know will somehow diminish my sense of future security to some degree, without eliminating it altogether, and still allow me then to contribute something, or fail to contribute to things that really go against my conscience. If that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Hi there, Michael.
Hello there, Vincent. Good morning. What an interesting discussion this morning. Many of my thoughts have already been brought up and answered to a certain degree. As you know, I always come from a certain corner, and that is my life and what I've lived through, and a lot of that had to do with alcoholism and addiction. And learning to live with it. I have been sober for a very long time, 2 to 12-step programs. And these programs operate by attraction rather than promotion. And the way we do that is we don't tell anybody what they need or who they are or what they are. But we say, if you're having these problems, come listen to us, and perhaps you'll hear something that resonates with you. And if you do, we have a simple little program for complicated people that help us live our lives without subjection to the demon or the parasite or what is our illness called addiction. And it is so hard often not to reach out and grab somebody and want to just take them and push them through the steps, as we say, to find sobriety, but that doesn't work. I have to carry my message primarily by how I live my life, and by trying to live a sober, honest life. I often have people come to me and say, I think you have something that I want, so to say. Namely, how do you live with this way, or how are you calm with that way? We have a son who is homeless in the streets and has battled with addiction since a very, very young age, as I did. But starting in high school, we got him into treatment, etc. He spent many years sober, went back out and had a very difficult time, lost a marriage, and he is still out there. And we have to be guarded against him because of the danger he poses to us with his addictions. Yet at the same time, anytime he comes to us, we're open to him. It's a really tricky thing to be open to someone like this without enabling them and yet offering a helping hand, maybe out of the gutter. He has the ability to get housing and hasn't taken it. I can't change that. Perhaps more mental health services out there would be helpful and finally get through to him. I don't honestly know, but that's a big part of it. And as far as giving, for example, I'm careful of giving to the guys on the corner, standing out there for 4-hour shifts, begging for money on the corner and spending it on drugs. Yeah, go ahead.
So, Michael, I'm seeing a lot of hands up, and I just want to move us along. But if I can respond to an initial point that you made, I think that your point is right from the beginning. That there is a sense in which embodying it or living it is much more compelling than preaching it. So as you say, attraction, not promotion. I think that's key to how even the gospel is best spread, if you will. It becomes a point of attraction because of, I want that thing you have, that joy you experience or whatever. And when it's authentic in us, I think that's a much more authentic way of drawing people, if you will, just by being who you are and seeing, and other people then discovering what's in that. I want to thank you for raising that point.
I just want to say, I think we do that at St. Columbus Church.
Thank you. I hope
Seriously.
so. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Let's see. That brings us then to Gerald, please. Gerald, just go ahead and unmute, please. Gerald, you'll need to unmute. Gerald, are you with me? Can you hear me? You're muted. There you go.
Am I okay now?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm on my iPad and I don't know where some of the icons are hidden until you touch the right spot. And anyway, I'm dog sitting. Just a couple of things went through my mind, and I guess I've struggled with, what can I do? I'm not doing enough. And I honestly, and maybe it's a cop-out, but I kind of got to the point, I think, where I said, well, okay, God doesn't expect me to be God. I'm not even going to be a Gandhi or an MLK. I may be a little cog on that wheel. And when I realize that, with the grace of God, I can do something. And through God's mercy, I'll be forgiven for not doing more. And I honestly think that for some of us, the best thing we can do is not create problems for the others, not to become a burden on society, not to be a part of making things worse. And it's always good to look back, I think, at the Holocaust. But I think it would do us well to look at what's happening at the border right in front of our eyes. Regardless of what the law says, your heart goes out to those people who want to come across the border just to have a decent life. And if they're willing to trudge that far with all the dangers and pay the fees they have to pay to get across the border, they must be leaving something pretty ugly. On the other hand, we don't have a system in place to vet those people, as I understand it. And that's the unfortunate thing, is that we're letting people through helter skelter. And I'm sure 99% of them are great people and they'll be an asset to our society. But I would be willing to bet there's 1%. And if that's 5,000 people, I think 1% would just be 5. But how many people does it take to become a part of that chain of bringing drugs in?
So
So much of what we've heard the last few weeks about Afghanistan is we lost 2,600 people over 20 years. And that's terrible. But we willingly kill 30 to 40,000 a year on our highways. Those guys in Afghanistan had a better chance of surviving Afghanistan than driving on some of our highways. 90,000 people a year are dying from drug overdoses.
So Gerald, once again, I want to respond to what you're saying, and I think I understand the comparisons you're making. I just want to respond because I see there's a number of people and we're running some low on time. If I can offer, thank you for those insights. I think one of the things, a takeaway from what you're suggesting is really the relationship between the interior life, if you will, and how that impacts or has implications for real world realities, and how we can really think through or in a sense begin to integrate such huge problems that we're dealing with comparatively and so on. So I don't suggest that the problems you're raising are simple. I am profoundly disappointed in the 20-year war we just fought and the deleterious outcome of it. I'm with you 100% on that. But when we do the kind of inner work that I'm talking about in this particular instance, I think what we realize is all we can do is our little part in our part of the world. And maybe that is indeed bringing to consciousness or bringing to light the types of comparisons you're so clearly articulating for us. But I'm very well aware that the wars that we don't fight within get projected without, either in local society, international, national. So the work begins within our own hearts, in this case, which is the one thing of all that you're talking about, we actually have some agency over. I dare not say control. That sounds a little too much, but certainly agency. So anyway, thank you for raising those very important points, to be sure.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Kathy, please.
In this section, and people have been talking about the importance of passion in terms of guiding us out of this place of complacency. And I had an experience this past week that I don't really have any contact with any passion that is moving me out of this place of complacency, but I had an experience with spirit which showed me that if I allow it, spirit can be moving me in other ways. And that is across the street from where I live in essentially condo and apartment row, so it's very high density. So across the street, there was a man who I started seeing about 3 weeks ago sitting in a camp chair right on the edge of the road. And and this day after day, I saw him there whenever I went out for my walk, and I started feeling really creeped out by him, thinking that maybe he was watching people to see whose house he could break in. So then I started taking circuitous routes back to my home so that, he generated fear. Then 2 days ago, I went, out for my walk again, and there he was. And I started to turn to the right to go up on my usual route. And some energy in me turned me back around. And all of a sudden, I'm walking towards this guy. Now, I'm an off the end of the scale introvert. I've got social anxiety. So strangers also are really fearful, and it keeps me from engaging. But here I am, I'm walking toward him and I say, so what's up? I see you out here every day and what, sitting here, what's up? And he said, foreigner, tourist, no English, Turkey. And then he points to this little pin on his jacket that is the Turkish flag. I said, oh, well, welcome, welcome. And then he points back to the condo towards where the person is that he's staying with. And so we can't really communicate very much, but we just kind of do sign language. And I feel this light go on inside of me. And as I walk, and then, we say goodbye and I turn towards my walk and this feeling of joy just erupts inside. It's like, oh my God, this guy I thought who was gonna, rob me and everything is somebody so different. Mm-hmm. And so then the next day, supposed to be like the day before yesterday, I walk out there and he's out there again. And so I'm just halfway to the street. All of a sudden, my arm is up there with a great big wave and he's got a great big wave back. And so again, I go to greet him and I learn his name. He learns mine. And I just am so grateful for this energy that I allowed to take me over, to turn me towards him, to realize that there can be real grace and beauty in the stranger. And I just thought it was such a beautiful lesson for me to allow more spaciousness inside, to allow spirit to direct me towards where I'm to go and who I'm to be with. And this total stranger who doesn't speak any English, and yet we could talk about the weather and just introduce ourselves. We could make the connection. So even on the way back, he and the woman he was visiting with, she had just come out. So they went on their walk, I went on mine, but then we converged down our same road, they on their side of the street and me on mine. But I saw them and I put a big wave and they had a big wave and we wished each other a happy evening. It's like, oh my gosh. So I just wanted to put that out there. That seemed to fit and is helping me overcome this complacency.
Well, and Kathy, it also speaks to the metaphor of, I think your whole story is a metaphor for what happens that keeps us separate, those kind of bubbles that I was talking about, that most of that is just rooted in fear, in projection, in all kinds of assumptions or judgments we make about whoever the perceived other is, that creates those boundaries. So that little turn that you made is I think you'll find interesting in light of the exercise, the practice that I want to propose this week. It's really about turning, and that. So your story is almost parabolic about that. To turn toward Christ means to turn away from something. So what are you turning away from? And in this sense, that turn wasn't just turning toward this man who is an alteri Christi, we would say, another Christ, but you turned away from your fear in that moment. It's very important that you see that turning was a turning toward openness, toward love, toward union. And that meant you turned away from the fear that had you going in the opposite direction. And this plays out in our lives over and over and over again on various levels. So if you can stay around for the practice, I think you'll find it. You beat me to it by about a week. So thanks for that. It's really a beautiful story, very metaphorical for all of us. I appreciate that. Let's see. So we're coming up a little bit on time. So Elizabeth, I'll end with you. Oh, I'm sorry, Anna, you had your hand up. So Penny, Paloma, Richard, Paloma, Elizabeth, and then Anna. Okay, Penny, go right ahead.
Yes, I'll make it quick. I think this is all driven by fear of self-preservation. And one of the things that struck me so much about the conversation from Michael's end is so often we resent people within our own families who aren't pulling their weight, somehow are, the black sheep of the family who have perhaps wounded us or cheated us. And so I noticed this very much with my husband's family. There was part of his family who were sort of dependent upon the mother who gave them the money, and then they got checks from my husband. And it was always this sense of, in a way, resentment about why are they not able to hold a job? Why are they not able to hold things together? And it was a struggle, I think, for my husband later in his life, is to find a way to create a sense of peace with this, rather than judgment and anger, to recognize that some people are not born with some of the gifts that many of us have,
Right.
and are in fact living somewhat on the margins. And what was so beautiful was that at the end of his life, he reached out to this brother and discovered that there was no resentment from the brother's side. There was only love. And it was a remarkable thing, because the woundedness was really within his own family. And he had struggled a great deal to try and find a way to accept this brother and his very difficult life. And I think that sometimes finding peace within our own families and trying to overcome this need for self-preservation or self-justification or fear of being taken advantage of, that's probably a very big spiritual challenge in many of our families.
Indeed. I mean, in many ways, families are where we receive both our primal experience of love, but also of woundedness. And these can become, traumatizing throughout one's lifetime. If there is a kind of, even if it's just born of an early neglect rather than an overt, there's a certain woundedness that comes out of this too. So for sure. Thank you, Penny. Appreciate your insights there. Paloma and Richard.
Hello, it's Paloma today. Hello. I wanted to chime in with something that feels like it's evolving this morning about this building of relationship with these inner fearful parts, and a little sort of miracle moment this week, which was that we've been building a relationship with a homeless person that happened kind of unexpectedly for me, in a place where we'd been walking sort of several times a week during COVID. It has become sort of a homeless encampment street that enters the park over by Richmond Marina. And Richard had noticed that there was one of the homeless people that had some woodworking equipment, and that was quite fancy, something that might be a tool that he was actually looking to try and get to help on some repairs that we were doing. So he went over and bridged this relationship with this guy who was in the homeless encampment, and talking to him about where he had like a little woodworking area set up. And it led to them, kind of him making a repair part for us. And then that led to actually, it turns out he knows how to do other repairs, and we are needing some dry rot work on our house. And so now this guy has been coming to our house and working with us over the last month. And something amazing has been happening, which is, I'll call him John. John comes here and I feel like I'm falling in love. Like he, at the end of the day, before he goes home at the end of the day, we'll sit out and, have some snacks together, and oftentimes we'll eat together. But what's really happening is my own initial fear. And even I said, Richard, what are you doing inviting this homeless person to come and work on our house, really? And I saw my own resistance and fear, but in Richard sort of spotting this opportunity to be sort of in a mutual relationship, it's like we've both been growing in the process. And it's kind of like what I think it was Kathy was saying about the Turkish man in the chair. It was like, I see him glowing and flowing and enlightening, and just the joy of each day greeting each other. And I'm sad at when the project will end. We've now become invested in each other's lives, and it's been beautiful, and it's ongoing. It's new.
So Paloma, thank you. It's again a very powerful story, because even though it's a small thing in the grand scheme of things, it's huge, because so much had to be crossed and overcome within you, as you had sort of acknowledge about your concerns, your fears, your questioning of Richard's decisions, and then how that begins to soften and change, the relationship becomes much more reciprocal. It's not just what you're giving to this person, $1 buying lunch, but what they're giving to you in the reciprocity of their skills and of the needs you have, and how that's forging a relationship across huge economic lines, right? And so even though the project may end, it doesn't mean the relationship has to. And based on your experience of somebody who is skilled and trustworthy, for example, a recommendation to a neighbor, who knows what the fruits of this could be, precisely because Richard sort of risked crossing that line rather than going to the internet and finding somebody who could come and do this job, right? So something about your local community, the local neighborhood, crossing economic lines. I mean, it's small on the global scheme of things, but tremendously huge in what it's in the symbolic weight and power for transformation of perception and so on that it happens. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. And also the divides between Richard and me, just like not having tension between us and making this decision about our house.
Yeah, no small thing. Thank you, Paloma. Elizabeth, and then we'll end with Anna, and I'll move to practice today.
Okay, thank you. I've especially appreciated our discussion of finding our part. Unfortunately, I've evolved out of this past compulsion, but I used to be so compulsive about doing so many things to try to single-handedly save the world. I mean, I was so bad that my nickname for myself was General Manager of the Universe. It was exhausting, but two things really helped me. One is that at the front of our church, there's a Mosaic of Christ. And I've been gazing at it for, gosh, I guess 31 years now. And Christ is rising from the water, and he's surrounded by the lilies of the field, and then goes up into the stars. But I think about each little piece in the mosaic, and a piece of a mosaic is called a tessera. And I've just meditated for so many years about how we're all tesserae that are part of Christ and all creation. And then together, we can really make a difference. Mm-hmm. The other thing that really helped me, this was so many years ago, we were out at the Monastery of Christ in the Desert in New Mexico. And Abbot Phillips said in a homily, "We are all made in the image of God, and God is infinite." We are all made in the image of God, and God is infinite. And those two things really helped me just go, yeah, I need to find my little part. And then, you know, together we're part of Christ and all creation. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, Elizabeth, that's just a beautiful perspective. I would love if you could in any way link us to that mosaic. It sounds stunningly beautiful. I don't know if your church has that posted on their website. But yes, you know, that's it. We're all tiles in a large mosaic. It's another way of thinking about that contextuality. So we really have to balance, you know, not becoming general manager of the universe, or as I would think of myself as czar of the universe, but okay. So that how do we come across the balance between, you know, needing to do it all and not? And I think though, one of the beautiful things I think needs to be acknowledged, in Elizabeth, what you said and what I've been hearing from others, is the desire to want the world to be a better place, is the capacity to have heartbreak over so much of what we're seeing, and to feel the paralysis and to feel right there, that speaks of a loving, compassionate heart, right? So that's to be acknowledged and to be honored for what it is. It's a beautiful thing for those of us who want to be general manager, because we want things to be better, right? Because we're saddened at the state of affairs that are out of our control. Very natural, beautiful, and compassionate impulse. I think, you know, earlier in the book, we talked about a story of Abba Pambo from the Desert Mothers and Fathers, who was learning a psalm, and as his Abba showed him the first verse of the psalm, which is to guard his tongue from offending people, he runs out of the hut and takes 19 years plus just to try to wrap his life around the meaning and to do that one thing. And the abbot who read him that was offended that he ran out before hearing the rest of the psalm, but he said, it's taking me 19 years and I still haven't mastered that one thing. But what comes out of that realization is the entrance into embodying scripture can be had through any particular verse. We all enter from a verse that calls us, challenges us, summons us, and from there we end up embodying the whole gospel. And I think that's true also in our discipleship. No matter what verse, no matter what activity, no matter what action or summons we're called to, it becomes just the entry point to realizing we're part of that beautiful mosaic. We're entering from a different place, doing different work, but it's all part of what makes that mosaic so beautiful and is the entry point to take, to really connecting to it all. So thank you for that, Elizabeth. Lovely. I'm sorry, I'm hoping to see that. What is the name of your church? Maybe I could look it up myself.
I am so not technical that someone else would probably need to put it up, but it's St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Perfect. And I could just look that up later.
Tell you this, that the mosaic was made a really long time ago. And in this mosaic, Christ does have blue eyes and red hair. So you kind of need to get past that.
Right. A good Irish Jesus. Right. Exactly. Wonderful. Fair enough. Well, thanks, Elizabeth. I appreciate that so much. Let's see. And Anna, please.
I'm going to stop my video because I have an unstable connection.
Okay.
Okay. So I wanted to go back to something Gerald said about, people willy-nilly coming over the border. A very long time ago, there was a program of visas for people coming to work for a season. And that worked very well. And for some unknown reason, because I haven't deeply researched it, that was eliminated. And that was when a lot of the difficulties started. And in the old system, employers were responsible. They brought people over individually. And anyway, I think we need something like that again. And also, we're talking about locality, and we live in the Bay Area in a particularly high cost of homeless or having homes. And most of the country, it's really a lot of people that are mentally ill and thrown out. Same in California, but in the Bay Area particularly, there are a lot of families that are homeless, like not having issues. Right. It's just the cost. Right. And also, we live adjacent to wine country, and in Napa there are some bridges that are famous for workers. The workers come up from south and they're working in the fields, picking the grapes, tending the vineyards, and they can't afford housing in Napa, so they're sleeping under the bridge. So it's, just like the others who have talked to individual homeless people and found their story. Everyone has some individual stories, and there's all these intricate things, but I think there can be solutions.
Yeah, Anna, thank you. And I think that, that's, what one of the things you're raising is where contemplative discipleship meets policy making to try to make the world better. It's no small thing to strive for a society in which, there's the structures that are put in place are more just. When we look at the end of this chapter and I try to propose ascetical practices for the modern person, there's essentially three that I propose. Personal love, that is how we learn to love one another in whom we're in constant contact, and how that those struggles come out in interpersonal relationships. But then the second one I look at is impersonal love. So what does it mean to contribute to a just society as a way of loving those people who I'll never know or meet, the folks under the bridge who you're talking about? And then, of course, the practices in which we address things that we have no power over whatsoever, the practice of keeping vigil, as it were. So thank you for that. And I think, Anna, you'll see a lot of that come to fruition when we look at those final pages of the chapter and really what it means, where these are practices meet the sort of the mission or the work of social justice in the gospel. Thank you. Okay, thank you all for such really insightful and helpful comments. I see the time, and I want to give us a little chance to talk about practice. But first, let me begin by giving your practice for this coming week. Sorry, it's a little long. It's actually quite simple, but I wanted to be able to explain it. So this is what I discuss. It would seem the real antidote to our demonic influences is not exorcism, but love, not a battle between you and your demons per se, but a transformation of you into Christ, in whom all things are reconciled. Overcoming our demons may be hard to accomplish, but it's easy to do. Whenever you turn toward someone or something, it implies turning away from someone or something else. It is that simple. This week's practice, the simple act of turning your attention and awareness toward Christ, and everything else will fall into place. When your attention wanders, turn your attention toward Christ. When you're tempted toward anger or negativity, turn toward Christ. When you feel worthless, hopeless, despairing, turn toward Christ. And in each moment, you can do this simply by calling on the name of Jesus, thus cultivating an ever greater attentiveness to Christ's presence that over time becomes habitual and persistent. So this is the practice that I would encourage you to do. And as I mentioned, I really feel a number of you, in particular, Kathy's story really talks about this action of turning. The interior turning has real world effects. To put that in another way, if you recall when we talked about the story of the prodigal son, the first thing he does in his waywardness is turns toward himself. Some texts render that he came to his senses or he came to himself. And from that interior turn toward himself, rather than his seeking of pleasure out in the world, is the first really step in return to his father, right? In return to his intimate relationship. So if Kathy, if you don't mind my using your metaphor, Kathy's first turn was away from the interior fear. And that interior turn led to a physical embodiment in the world of a turning toward another person. And that's what I would like you all to reflect upon. And this will be sent to you by Joanne probably later today or tomorrow. So if you don't get this all down. So just offer a simple practice rather than having to necessarily conceive this in any kind of literal battle with demons. A simple turning to Christ will turn you away from them. And the effects that has in the world are often profound. The story that Paloma shared being another poignant example of that turning away from something, fear, turning then toward another, and then the relationship that begins to flourish. We shouldn't underestimate the beauty of these things, the power of these things, and the example of these things in a world that often seems bereft of any good news. So practice that turning in whatever way feels most right to you. And I would look forward to that conversation. Okay, let me then share with you last week's practice as a way of wrapping up our conversation for today, for anyone who would like to share. And the question is this: attend to any one aspect of your life in which being content with mediocrity masks a deeper complacency, what lies beneath. So this is a challenge of introspection, and obviously is based on that sentence that I read as the last sentence before what we talked about today. All that these parasitic demons need to sort of run amok with the world is a sense of complacency from those who are not the despots of history, but simply allow that work to unfold unchallenged. So attend to one aspect of your life in which being content with mediocrity has for you masked a deeper complacency, and share perhaps what you've discovered, what lies beneath that. So if anyone would like to share their thoughts as we wrap up today, I'd be happy to hear how you worked with this practice, if at all. Hi, Christine.
I would just say that the thing that completely stares me in the face, knocks me over the head, and brings me to my knees is my complicity in global warming. And that has led me to, as the rest of St. Columba's is doing, examining my life and where can I make those little changes that over time can really help. And that's given me more of a sense of agency, and at least that I'm moving in the right direction.
Right. Yeah, and talk about an overwhelming problem. Every time we think we're making a decision in the right direction, we find it's tied to some horrific chain of something that is, and yet I hear that, it's one of the reasons, Christine, that I'm trying to work with a small group to develop this, what I've been calling this trellis, a way to shape and to give direction to our decision making, is so important because I think for many of us, we're not sure what to do or how to make those changes, and just having agency, the ability to take small steps in the right direction is essential to the collective efforts to move us. Because I think what happens is, as you make small steps, it leads you to having a capacity to what becomes a giant leap in the end. But we have to start with that. So thank you for that. And thank you for your willingness to continue to struggle with that rather than shut it out. It's big time important. Yeah. Penny, please.
Yes, mediocrity in the sense of managing my own affairs. And one of them, of course, is the financial side. And I was part of a big UN preparation conference on global warming in many aspects yesterday. And one of the things they said is divestment, divestment from putting your money in the fossil fuel industry. And I thought to myself, I don't know where my retirement funds are. I don't know exactly where my financial investments are. I need to take responsibility for that. So I think that's come out of that awareness that even individuals as well as institutions who continue to fund the fossil fuel industry, which is contributing to global warming, it's a lackadaisical attitude on my part that I can just turn it over to Edward Jones and they'll send me the financial returns. Why don't I know? This is my money. And so that sense of mediocrity about taking charge of where I am in fact investing my money and my time, I think that is a recognition that I have been slothful, not taking account of what I'm doing with my life and my resources. So I think that hit me all of a sudden yesterday when we're really looking at global warming and what I personally am doing.
Yeah, Penny, it's really a significant issue. Several years ago at our diocesan convention, a few years before, I guess it was the prior year to the convention we had. I want to say it would have been, I guess, in 2016, I guess. We had our diocesan convention, and it was what was put on the floor was divestment of diocesan funds from fossil fuel and dirty companies, as it were. And it was inspired by the decision made by the national church the year before to do the same. And so the request was for that to trickle down from a national decision to diocesan. So it was on the floor. And I thought this was going to be just an absolute shoo-in, and was shocked to see people lined up at the no mic to challenge this. So who would challenge? Well, long story short, what it turned out, and I might have mentioned this before, but it was such a powerful moment that the amendments that were being asked to be made to what would, the proposition on the floor was that it should not, therefore, if we make this decision, it should come then with a further trickle down request that individual Episcopalians look at their own financial portfolio and consider what they might do in the same area, and not simply say, well, my church has done this, and therefore it's the slacktivism thing. I've done my part because I voted yes for the diocese to divest, but haven't done that deeper work of asking, what might I do, or how might I, mitigate my own investments toward the same end? And I thought that was brilliant. And with that amendment, it passed. And so it came not only with this affirmation for the diocese, the Episcopal Church to divest, but then for that challenge to trickle down. So I certainly looked at my own portfolio and made decisions accordingly, but they're tough because you realize that it could mean some loss of revenue for a retirement that I'm working hard for and so forth. So it's, there are struggles and there are complexities involved, but it absolutely is true. Follow the money. And part of, I think, one of the solutions, and I hate to say it sound like a capitalist, is that we have to make green, and what that means, both sustainable but economically viable, so that there's buy-in through companies and technologies. That is part of the solution. And I think it is viable, but it's up to us as individual consumers to say, here's where we're investing our money in this future, not that future. And that's what pushed pressure on the market to shift. And if 10 people do it, maybe not so much, 100, 1,000, 1 million, now you're talking substantial amounts of money that could begin to make investors and company CEOs rethink how they do business. And that's important. To come back to that word, we have agency with some of the financial resources at our disposal. So thank you for that. Other thoughts before we wrap up for the day? All right. Well, I do want to thank you all, as always, for being with me. It's a lovely way to begin my Saturday. We are having, for those of you local and who may not have heard, we're having a fiddler's concert outside this afternoon that actually Penny Washburn helped organize for us as a way of raising funding for us for fire mitigation on our property, a small thing toward a very big issue, especially out here in California. So we're grateful to Penny for that. And I've got in the retreat house some of the fiddlers here today. So I'm looking forward to that this afternoon. So in the meantime, I bid you all a very blessed week ahead. For those who I won't see tomorrow, especially for our liturgy, I give you and send you with my blessing. So may you be blessed, may you be happy, may you be healthy. May you have the courage to look deep within your heart at those fears and to turn to the life-giving invitation of Christ to love in all things. And may you go with my blessing, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. All right. Good weekend now, a nice week ahead. God bless you all.